This is Healthy Ponds, a two-part WebEx series, and it's brought to you by Area 5 and our educators with Purdue Extension. I'd like to remind you if you have questions, to please type them into the chat box and make sure that when it says to, it's to all participants, and we will answer those questions at the end of the program. Our speaker for today is Paul Stockbrandt. And Paul, it seems like you're ready to go, so I will transfer it over to you.
All right, thank you. Like she said, I'm Paul Stockbrandt. I'm the Assistant District Fisheries Biologist for District 5, which encompasses Vigo County down to Knox County and all the way east to Dearborn. 17 counties in total. If you live in that area, me or my supervisor, Dave Kataka, are the ones you want to talk to if you have any questions. Today I'm going to talk about a fisheries renovation at Rubel Lake in Vigo County as a little bit of an overview of one of the tools we use in fisheries management to make fishing better. If you're not familiar with Rubel Lake, it is part of Fowler Park, which is operated by Vigo County Parks and Recreation. We, with the Division of Fish and Wildlife, manage the fishery. That is to say, we do fishery surveys, population studies, stocking recommendations, regulation recommendations, and all that kind of stuff. In this project, we had help from Bass Unlimited, most of the Indiana State Hatchery System, and Goose Pond Fish and Wildlife area was nice enough to lend us one of their large wetland water pumps to help draw the lake down. A little bit about the lake itself. It's 27 acres, max depth about 20 feet, maybe a little less. Fisheries renovations are pretty drastic measure. They don't happen a lot or very often. It's very uses a lot of resources and time. So it don't happen very often. The last one happened at Rubel Lake, or the last one that happened at Rubel Lake was in 1982, much for the same reason that I will talk about in just a second. As I mentioned earlier, we do a lot of fish surveys around the state. Unfortunately, we can't do every lake every year. So the last three were completed in 1991, 2012, and 2018. And in 2012, the gizzard shad was first discovered or rediscovered since 1982. At that time, they made about 10% of the fish community. By 2018, when we went back, they had increased to about 30% of the fish community. So 30% of the fish in the lake were gizzard shad. And that's pretty typical of what you see in a gizzard shad introduction. Gizzard shad are a native fish species to Indiana, but in these man-made impoundments, they tend to outcompete and outproduce other fish species that we consider more desirable. And we saw in 2018, we saw increased abundance of shad and decreased sport fish. We were not seeing very many bass in our samples, and we were not seeing very many large panfish, which are two characteristics you kind of look for when considering such a drastic measure as a full fish renovation. A fish renovation, if you're not familiar, is the complete removal of fish from a lake and for the purpose of just starting over with a blank slate. We removed the undesirable species as well as the desirable species, and we restock with the proportions of the species we want. So it's not something that we take lightly. It takes a lot of planning and thought before we decide to go with this route. The timeline for this, in early 2019, Vigo County came to us, or we became aware that Vigo County was planning on drawing the lake down to perform maintenance on the historic covered bridge that you see in this photo. Since we knew the data said that the fishery was deteriorating and the lake was already being drawn down for maintenance of the building, it was an opportunistic situation where we decided we'd draw the lake down as much as we could and go ahead and perform the renovation. In July, Vigo County began drawing the lake down. The emergency drain structure was able to lower the lake a couple of feet. As well, they installed 2 PVC siphons in the 6 to 8 inch diameter range. If you have a pond your own that you're looking to renovate, siphons are probably going to be what you want to do unless you plan on doing some earthwork on your dam. And then towards the end, we're kind of fighting the weather, and we installed some gas pumps and as well as the large wetland pump from Goose Pond. We performed a fish salvage in August to try to save some of those fish, and installed some new habitat structures, performed the renovation in late October, and restocked in November and finished up that initial stocking in spring of this year. So in all, it was about a year-long process, which is relatively quick for renovations. Sometimes they take 2 or 3 years of planning and execution in total, but we got this one done in just a year. And a fish salvage is where we go out. We had 2 electro fishing boats, which use electricity to stun fish. It has a very low mortality rate. It's pretty safe on the fish. They kind of float up to the surface or swim up to the surface where we can net them and collect them into a live well. We do this while the lake is drawn down. It kind of helps consolidate the fish, and we're able to try to save as many fish as we can from being removed from the lake lethally. We were able to get over 100 largemouth bass up to 20 inches. I wish we could say they were all near 20 inches, but as our previous data showed, we didn't see a whole lot of large fish out there, and only a few black crappie and bluegill of catchable size. Paul Brown there in the picture from East Fork Hatchery transported those fish for us to Burns Lake and Hawthorne Park. We wanted those fish to remain local, so local anglers could still utilize that resource if they wanted to. We usually install emergency regulations that essentially remove the length limit and the creel limit to allow anglers to harvest pretty much anything out of the lake that they want to, as another way to further utilize that resource without killing it for no reason. However, since it was such a quick project, we didn't have enough time to go through that procedure, so we just did the fish salvage alone. In October, the lake was down pretty close to 5 feet, 4 or 5 feet. In the past, Bass Unlimited in Vigo County had discussed with us installing new habitat structures. Habitat helps bass, or all fish, hide and it's good for fish communities. It also provides the target for anglers as it attracts fish to them, and anglers can go out and fish around them and hopefully catch some big fish. As part of that, we had, prior to this project, the renovation project starting, we had went out and collected bathymetric data, which is to say we had the depth contours of the whole lake, which would allow us to place habitat structures at the appropriate depths. If habitat is placed too shallow, it can become a boating hazard. We don't, as a state agency, we don't want to be liable for somebody's broken prop that stranded them on the lake for a few hours or anything like that. If it goes too deep, especially in the summer, those deeper, that deeper water can become very low on oxygen or completely deprived of oxygen. And if there's no oxygen in the water, fish aren't going to be there, and that habitat is going to be rather useless. So Bass Unlimited had a build day. A group of volunteers came out and built these pallet structures that you see in the picture. We like building structures because they tend to last longer than, say, a brush pile or a pile of evergreen trees, like Christmas trees or something. Christmas trees don't tend to last but a year or two, and then they become a pile of sticks on the bottom, which provides very little habitat structure. So we had them build these pallet structures instead, and using our bathymetric data, gave them some locations where they could do that or install them. And we ended up installing them, 6 of them, in this cove south of the beach. If you're familiar, this is the beach, and this is the cove where 6 of them went. And the other 6 went offshore here in front of the Brentlinger shelter. In past years, Vigo County has participated in a Christmas tree donation program and had volunteers put brush piles, where's my mouse, in these coves over here on the east side. So there has been habitat work done in the past. And with the new structures on the west side, the lake really does have quite a bit of submerged habitat out there. So hopefully in a couple of years, these fish that we have since restocked are going to be really, really good fishing out there. Which brings us to the renovation. Late October, Vigo County worked really hard to get the lake elevation 5 feet below normal pool. Again, by this time they used the emergency drain structure, the 2 siphons, several small gas pumps, and the large wetland pump from Goose Pond. We had 2 treatment boats. One was an airboat that we used to get up into the shallows in case there was any spots that a traditional outboard boat couldn't get to, or any puddles that were out of reach. And we also had the traditional outboard type of a boat laying down chemical as well. The process there is we went out, we had depth finders on our boat to track our progress, and we made transects back and forth with the goal of an even and thorough chemical distribution. You don't want any pockets of fresh water that could create a refuge for fish to survive in. And as part of that, we also had a drip bucket on the very south end where the down up here there's water coming in from upstream, and that fresh water can create, again, a refuge for species to survive. So we put a drip bucket up there, which is exactly what it sounds like, a bucket with a hole in it that slowly applies that chemical over a period of time to that fresh water flowing in. The chemical itself is called rotenone. It is a restricted use pesticide. You must have a restricted use applicator's license to purchase and apply rotenone. It is very toxic to gill-breathing animals, so fish and insects as well. It can be very caustic, very corrosive to equipment, and definitely not something you want on your skin or in your person. So there's strict guidelines on the label. For personal protective equipment, we were covered head to toe with goggles, masks, full body suit, and rubber boots and gloves. And that is a required guideline in the pesticide application label. I don't know how familiar you are with pesticide application. Every pesticide has a label that you are legally required to follow. It gives you safety guidelines, application, dosage requirements, as well as how often or how long afterwards you can use that particular lake in this instance, or land in the case of a terrestrial application. Rotenone is derived from plants, so it's a natural compound. It interferes with cellular respiration, which is to say that it blocks oxygen from being absorbed into the body. So it's the fish take it in and essentially they suffocate. Shad are very intolerant to rotenone. You can use a much lighter dosage to kill shad, but to get a total kill, we use the maximum dosage because there was the presence of fish like carp, which is this fish right here. That is a common carp, which are very tolerant to all conditions. Basically, they're very tolerant to chemicals and very broad-ranging. They're very generalistic species. They like a wide range of conditions. And we were seeing those popping up on the day of the chemical application, and in the days remaining, they were floating up on shore, like this picture here. So we think we got a thorough and complete fisheries renovation. We applied 105 gallons as per the max dosage on the label and the volume that we estimated with our bathymetric data. Following the treatment, we waited 2 weeks as per the guidelines on the pesticide label, and then we performed a 24-hour bioassay. And that basically is just testing the water for fish toxicity. We put several fish baskets around the lake at different locations, and we used crappie, bluegill, and red deer. And after 24 hours, if those fish are still alive, the lake is no longer toxic to fish. On November 7th, that's 2 weeks after the renovation, that bioassay failed. Those fish did not survive. The lake was still toxic to fish. And we think we underestimated the duration that rotenone persisted in the system due to a recent cold front. In between October 23rd and November 7th, there was a pretty severe cold front come in. There was ice on the lake and everything. So rotenone breaks down relatively fast. It has a half-life of 6 hours to 12 hours under normal conditions. But things like temperature, sunlight, pH, and water hardness, as well as a few others, probably affect that half-life. So under colder water temperatures and cloudier weather, we think that led to us underestimating how long that rotenone was in the system. We waited a week just to be safe. We probably could have waited a day or two, but we waited a whole week just to be safe. We don't want to put new fish into a toxic system. That would be cruel and a waste of resources. We waited a week and did it again, and those fish were very happy to be swimming around, very lively. And so from there, we decided it was time to restock. Now it's late November. The hatcheries came together and got us largemouth bass, bluegill, red ear, and black crappie. It's important to us to get fish in the lake as soon as we can, because if there were to be an introduction of a fish like gizzard shad, there would be no fish in there to compete with that species or prey upon that species, and in some way control that species from growing and producing as fast as they can. So just a week later, we were able to get those 4 species in to the lake. Channel catfish, just because of how they are raised, we weren't able to get them into the lake until March of this year. All these numbers are based on the acreage, and we use proven ratio. So if you do the math there's approximately 1 largemouth bass for the rest of these panfish species, bluegill, red ear, and crappie. It's about 26,000 to 5,000. This is approximately 5 to 1. That number has been proven time and time again over decades of fisheries management research, and that's not something we just pulled out of a hat, or that's what the hatchery had left over. We did that on purpose because it's a tried and true stocking method. If you have a private pond or a new pond of your own, you want to shoot for that 5 to 1 prey to predator ratio. So from here, we will continue to monitor that population as it matures. I think maybe we might even get out on the lake next week, or perhaps the following week, just to make sure those fish are alive and well and doing what we want them to do. In the future, as that community matures, we will add Rubel Lake to the channel catfish stocking schedule, which happens every other year at approximately 50 per acre usually. And those fish usually are around 8 inches long. Rubel Lake also undergoes vegetation treatments. We're in talks with reducing those. Vegetation is a good thing and a bad thing at times. We like vegetation because it provides cover for juvenile fish. It provides forage for bluegill by providing plenty of insects and critters for them to eat, as well as it provides those big adult bass a place to hide and ambush prey. So we really do like vegetation. It also sucks up a lot of excess nutrients, which helps prevent algae blooms. The toxic blue-green algae gets a lot of press. I'm sure you've seen that in the news every summer. Not a new thing, it happens every year. And as well as other algae blooms can cause problems as well. If there's an algae bloom and then a period of a few days of cold, cloudy weather, you can have that algae die off, and through decomposition will remove oxygen from the water, and you'll have a fish kill. So vegetation provides a lot of benefits, but at the same time, we don't want so much of it that you can't go fish or boat or swim. Rubel does have a swimming lake, and I don't know a single person that likes to go swimming and have weeds and algae scraping and brushing up against their legs. So We want to keep that area clear. We want to provide some places for shore anglers to fish, and we want to make sure that the boat ramp has no vegetation on it either. Boats and trailers are one really good way to transport vegetation from one body of water to another, so treating there helps reduce that possibility. And so we just want to find a happy medium on the vegetation treatment. I want to reiterate that the stocking ratios that we use are proven time and time again through decades of fish management research. There have been many instances in the past across the nation of well-intentioned anglers helping us out by stocking fish into public waters that they think will benefit the fishery. Oftentimes, that does not help the fishery, and it is in fact illegal in, I assume, every state in the nation. You can catch and release fish where you are fishing, but as soon as you take that fish from one body of water and put it into a lake such as Rubel, you have violated the law. I will also say that it is illegal to transport live gizzard shad. These fish, while native, they do provide such a nuisance to the state. We spend a lot of money controlling and removing gizzard shad that we have, it's so important to us that we made a regulation to, outlaw basically the transport of live gizzard shad. There are lakes such as Monroe where you can fish with live gizzard shad, but you have to catch them there and use them there. As soon as you take them off the lake or go over the dam or come up the dam from the tailwaters, you have once again violated the law if those fish are still alive. So that's kind of a word of caution there. We want to keep our fisheries healthy, and we want to keep you guys out of trouble. And another point I'd like to make out is habitat opportunities like in this project are pretty numerous. Not right now, of course, with the COVID-19 pandemic, the DNR calendar is fairly blank. But in the future, I hope everything's come back to normal. There will be plenty of volunteer opportunities to build habitat, clean up public access, other special events and parks, all kinds of opportunities out there for volunteering. I know Vigo County has volunteers at Pioneer Days, and I'm sure they have lots of other events to volunteer at. Bass Unlimited has lots of habitat builds and other kinds of fish improvement volunteer events, and DNR has lots of fish and wildlife events all over the state. So if you're looking for a volunteer, we always want help. We appreciate the help, and we'd like to see enthusiastic citizens out there working to improve fish and wildlife for us all, alongside us, so I should say. And that about sums up the project. Again, I'm the assistant fish biologist for District 5. If you have any questions after this, don't hesitate to call me. If you're not in this area, you can still call me, but you can check out this map down here, wildlife.n.gov, 3590.htm, and that'll give you the closest district biologist to you to give you the most localized and accurate information available. And with that, I will accept questions.
Thank you, Paul. We did have one question from Phil. Does rotenone kill invasive snails?
Ooh, invasive snails. I'm not sure. That is a good question. I would imagine that it does, but I don't know that for certain. Um, if I could get Phil's contact information, I could research that answer and get that to him.
And of course, on the label for every pesticide, it details what the pesticide can be used for. So if you're able to find a label, then that would clarify what its effect on invasive snails. Did we have any other questions from the attendees or panelists? Do we have any more questions for Paul? I had a question from Kurt. Why did you choose black crappie over white crappie for restocking? I know Green Valley has both.
That's a good question. Crappie of both species can fairly easily overpopulate in small impoundments. Black crappie are less likely to do so than white crappie. They also tend to do better in white crappie do better in more turbid water. So if the water is often muddy, white crappie often do better than black crappie. So that's pretty much the reason. We use a black crappie a lot, but in the larger impoundments, white crappie, we also do white crappie.
Great. We had a question from Arch. Is it possible to reduce shad problems by introducing predators like muskies in some cases?
Yes. So there are a few tools that fisheries managers can use. Predator management is one. And so Rubel Lake is fairly small, 27 acres. It's more effective in that situation where there's also the opportunity where the lake's already being drawn down. Just go ahead and start over from ground zero, right? So blank slate, and we can stock what we want at the rates that we want to. In other situations where the lake might be a water source or too large to be feasible to apply chemical, predator control is pretty much the only tool utilized. That's the only tool we have available. So it's very situational, case by case basis, but yes, it is possible.
Did we have any more questions from attendees or anyone?
Hey, this is Phil. I was looking at a specimen label of rotenone, and all it had on the label to control was fish. Had nothing on the label that I was looking at to control anything else but fish. So no snails were on the label.
Okay,
This is Bob
so
Bruner. I just looked up a little bit of research while you guys were talking about it. The University of Nebraska does have a paper out on it. It seems to show that invasive snails like the Chinese mystery snail do seem to be resistant to rotenone treatment.
So if it's not on the label, that pretty much tells you that you should look for another alternative. And thank you for looking that up, both of you. I would advise against that. I think you'd have to get special permission from someone to use a pesticide for a non-intended target species.
Did we have any more questions for Paul?
Yes, there was one that came in on what are some of the best predators for controlling shad?
Shad are typically open water species or pelagic species. So you're looking at other pelagic predators. So the Moroni species like striped bass, white bass, and hybrids thereof are pretty common introduction. Walleye and sauger and saugeye are common species as well for that purpose. Pretty much any predator, and in small impoundments, there's less open water, so you know, if you have enough large bass in there, they will control that predator as well. But it's hard to get enough large bass because gizzard shad grow so fast. They often outgrow the predator that's intended to control them.
That's a wonderful point, Paul. Did we have any more questions? All right. So next week we will have Dave Kataka join us, and he will be speaking about controlling vegetation and stocking and restocking fish. I know that for many pond owners, vegetation is a recurring battle. So if you're interested in understanding better how to control vegetation and restocking, then that program will be the place to be next Thursday at 1 p.m. So with that, we'll conclude our program, and we will see you next week.